Narcissistic Countertransference in Modern Psychoanalysis. This summary of key themes and concept from Hyman Spotnitz's 1979 work, Narcissistic Countertransference, focusing on its implications for psychoanalytic practice, particularly with severely disturbed patients. Part 1. Evolution of Countertransference Concepts. Spotnitz highlights a significant evolution in the understanding of countertransference within psychoanalysis over the last quarter century, pre-1979. From negative proscription to constructive use. Initially, countertransference was viewed as undesirable and a hindrance, a resistance that should not occur. However, theoretical advancements across psychoanalytic schools have led to a process of detoxification, moving from outright prohibition to thoughtful assessment and specific recommendations for the constructive use of countertransference. Dissolution of monolithic concepts. Parallel to this, the once monolithic concepts of transference and countertransference have dissolved. The widening scope of indications for psychoanalysis to include more severe emotional disorders, e.g., schizophrenic and non-psychotic patients, necessitated a more nuanced understanding. This led to the recognition of a continuum of transference states, ranging from the familiar Oedipal-type transference to psychotic transference, and corresponding characteristic emotional reactions to each state in the analyst. Enhancing understanding and guiding interventions. This refining process is crucial for understanding the interpersonal dynamics of the analytic relationship, especially in cases where primitive transference states evolve into object Oedipal-type transference. It provides diagnostic value and clinical implications, helping determine progress and preparing the analyst to recognize and deal appropriately with those significant changes in his effective reactions that usually accompany fluctuations in the patient's transference state. Part 2. Modern Psychoanalysis, a specific operational theory. Spotnitz frames his discussion within the perspective of modern psychoanalysis, a specific operational theory initially formulated for treating schizophrenic patients, but now seen as applicable to all psychologically reversible conditions. Distinction from classical psychoanalysis. While adhering to the Freudian framework for transference and resistance, modern psychoanalysis differs from classical psychoanalysis in sanctioning an extensive range of interventions, including symbolic, emotional, and ego-reinforcing communications, rather than relying entirely on interpretive procedures. Redefinition of countertransference. In modern psychoanalysis, countertransference is precisely defined as the therapist's unconscious reactions to the patient's transference attitudes and behavior. It explicitly excludes transferences the therapist might develop to the patient as a neutral object before the patient attaches feelings to them. Two groups of countertransference reactions. Subjective countertransference. Atypical feeling responses which are attributable to insufficiently analyzed adjustment patterns in the therapist and are usually rooted in distortions created by memory processes. This is the primary source of countertransference resistance and requires analyzing out. Objective countertransference. The feelings that are realistically induced by the patient's transference feelings and attitudes. While also having resistance potential, the student analyst is trained to sustain it and use it as a source of therapeutic leverage as well as for understanding the patient. Purposeful use of objective countertransference. The induced feelings from objective countertransference should be experienced freely and fully to maximize empathic understanding. They are then communicated selectively to resolving an immediate resistance of the patient. The effectiveness of these communications is directly proportional to their genuineness. Narcissistic countertransference. Objective type. This chapter specifically focuses on the analyst's realistic effective reactions to a patient in a state of narcissistic transference. The objective type of narcissistic countertransference. This distinguishes it from earlier pejorative uses of the term, which refer to the analyst's subjective reactions. Part 3. The reciprocal interchange in narcissistic transference. Patients in a state of narcissistic transference often exhibit primitive attitudes, suggesting a symbolic revival of clusters of experience during the pre-Oedipal period or unconscious attempts to reveal basic maturational needs that were not met by the primary object. This state profoundly impacts the therapist. Indistinct ego boundaries. The patient may experience the therapist as part of the self or like the self, leading to situations where the therapist may feel that he is in the presence of a kindred spirit or experience a strange sense of harmony. This also manifests as the patient attributing their feelings to the therapist, and vice versa, e.g., patient feels tired, therapist becomes aware of fatigue. Induced feelings in the therapist. The patient's primitive states can induce specific, often challenging, effective reactions in the therapist. Self-preoccupation, disinterest, drowsiness, mind wandering. A severely disturbed patient may appear to be totally unaware of the therapist's presence and totally preoccupied with himself. The therapist may then tend to focus on himself and become totally unaware of the patient. E.g., Mrs. C case. Anger. Urges to withdraw/terminate. When a very depressed patient talks repetitively about committing suicide, I suddenly experience strong anger. I become aware of urges to get out of the office for the day or get rid of the case. Helplessness, hopelessness, anxiety, desire to tranquilize. Schizophrenic patients early in treatment characteristically verbalize feelings of emptiness, strangeness, confusion, and hopelessness. The therapist may then be assailed by feelings of helplessness and hopelessness. Emotional withdrawal. Spotnitz recounts an experience where a psychotic patient's communication induced a feeling of total withdrawal in him, which he initially attributed to himself, but later recognized as patient-induced. Challenge of recognizing objective countertransference resistance. Analysts often use conscious and unconscious mechanisms to avoid experiencing or being controlled by these induced feelings. However, until the patient's problem is fully understood, this truly objective countertransference can give rise to countertransference resistance, meaning the analyst acts on these induced feelings in an anti-therapeutic way. Part 4. Clinical illustrations of narcissistic countertransference resistance. Spotnitz provides 2 detailed case examples to delineate hidden countertransference resistance originating in the objective type of narcissistic countertransference. Case of Mrs. C. Borderline patient presentation, fears of falling apart, paranoid ideas, depression, suicidal ideation, describe husband as overbearing, saw mother as domineering. Experienced therapist as the influencing part of her mind, with wavering ego boundaries, often feeling the therapist was part of her ego. Induced countertransference. Mrs. C's self-absorption and lack of interest in the therapist's presence induced self-absorption, drowsiness, and mind-wandering in Spotnitz, along with resentment of the state of disinterest. Her hostile interpretations of his brief interventions, e.g., "You're trying to manipulate and control me," induced strong urges to prove to her how wrong she was and desires to put her under pressure to accept my ideas. Resolution. Dreams of being overpowered, pointing to an unconscious wish to be dominated, help the analyst recognize that acting on his urges to pressure her would be anti-therapeutic. The resolution involved a radical shift to self-demand feeding. "I will talk to you only when you want me to, and tell you only what you want to know." This resolved the resistance and helped Mrs. C move towards relating to him as a separate person, eventually desiring a mutually cooperative relationship. Case of Mr. M. Schizophrenic patient presentation, history of severe emotional deprivation, multiple psychotic episodes coinciding with impending career success, self-attacking tendencies, try harder, you are not your mother, feelings of helplessness and hopelessness, little awareness of therapist presence, withheld information, reported no dreams. Induced countertransference and resistance. Mr. M's self-absorption and disregard for the therapist's presence induced withdrawal and disinterest in Spotnitz, leading to urges to shake him up and help him get going. Spotnitz recognized that acting on these urges was the countertransference resistance that had repeatedly stalemated the case. Previous therapists, and Spotnitz initially, encouraged his stated goals, which put him under intolerable pressure to accomplish, leading to regression and psychosis. Resolution. The essential clue was Mr. M's 2 relapses after encouragement. Spotnitz realized Mr. M's unconscious message was, "I'm an infant. I don't want to do anything." The radical change in strategy involved negative joining of this resistance. Instead of encouraging achievement, he told Mr. M to forget about going to work. Just take it easy. Let your father support you. Live off the fat of the land. Baby yourself. This shifted Mr. M's anger from self-blame to blaming the therapist, signifying a positive shift towards externalizing aggressive impulses and moving into object transference. Part 5. Discussion and implications. Challenge of indistinct boundaries. Narcissistic transference is characterized by indistinctness in ego boundaries between patient and object, making it difficult for the analyst to determine their immediate influence and easily leading to feelings like boredom, drowsiness, gloom, and self-attribution of lack of understanding. The analyst may not realize that the patient has succeeded in confusing him. Key to effective treatment. The successful analysis and resolution of this objective type of narcissistic countertransference resistance is the key to the effective treatment of the pre-Oedipal patient. Gradations of narcissistic countertransference. The cases of Mrs. C, borderline, and Mr. M, schizophrenic, illustrate different gradations and qualities of narcissistic countertransference. Mrs. C was relatively easy to work with due to clearer ego boundaries, more direct communication, and dreams providing clues. Mr. M was much more difficult to analyze due to primitive level, sparse material, lack of dreams, and indirect reproaches, making detection of resistance much harder. The incurable feeling. A crucial insight is that the general attitude that schizophrenia is incurable is almost invariably an expression of narcissistic countertransference resistance. The patient induces this feeling in the analyst. If the analyst accepts it as their own, therapy fails. However, if they recognize the source of the feeling and also becomes aware of his effective responses to it, the constructive use of these counter feelings dramatically brightens the prognosis for the patient. Importance of analyst self-awareness. The article implicitly and explicitly stresses the paramount importance of the analyst's ongoing self-analysis and awareness of their own effective reactions to avoid falling into countertransference resistance, particularly when working with severely disturbed patients. Recognizing these induced feelings, rather than acting on them or dismissing them, is fundamental to therapeutic progress.